just a slogan.
Ensure that you have the right tools and materials to work with. Here I'm using good quality cartridge paper. The size that I'm using is your regular cartridge paper. You can just fold that in half, cut it, and then fold the other half in half again and then cut it. So you will end up with about quarter size cartridge paper. Start is to think about the composition of the object or the subject matter that you're going to draw. All right, so you also want to think about how to position your substrate that you're drawing on. Will you be positioning it in a landscape orientation or a vertical orientation? Now, in this case, the composition appears to fit better in a portrait / vertical composition. So I'm going to turn my paper in a vertical way. There's of two nature. One is of a inanimate object and one is of from the natural. If you should simplify it, you're actually looking at a cylindrical form. So we want to start by drawing a cylindrical form. It is the main thing in the drawing. Now notice I started by making an ellipse. Now what is an ellipse? An ellipse is basically a circle that appears in a perspective form. Now why I said that? Because you're looking at the circle from a particular vantage point, it's going to appear like an ellipse. Now you don't want to draw the top of your container looking like this. Most students make that mistake and draw their container top looking like this, which is to make a perfect circle. This is wrong, right? Your ellipse must have an oval looking form or shape. All right, the next thing that you want to avoid, students, is to be making your ellipse with a point at the corners like this. You don't want a point at the corners like that, right? It is an oval. You must have a nice curve at the corners like this. Just to recap a little bit, now when you're drawing your ellipse, you want to make sure that you hold your pencil at a distance like this. You don't want to hold your pencil as if you're writing, because what that will do, it will restrict the fluid movement of your wrist, and it will tighten your lines and probably give you lines that you don't really need. Now you want to have lines that are fluid and flowing. Now notice here, my lines are going around real nice, and what happened is that the brain and coordination will eventually make those right curve that you want to make. All right, now notice I end up with several lines here, but no need to worry about that. All you have to do is to go back and just strengthen the ones or strengthen the area that looks correct to you, and you just take an eraser and remove the parts that don't look correct of your ellipse. So the next stage is to bring down those vertical lines to form your cylinder. If this is challenging for you, you can turn your paper horizontal, right, and you will probably be able to manipulate that line a little bit better. So you want to get those lines coming down. Now make sure that these lines are parallel. You don't want to have the lines going like this in that direction and maybe one going like that or going like that, right? The lines must be vertical in nature, right? They must be straight coming down. All along, I am keeping my lines very light and probably even make multiple lines, right? I'm not trying to make any perfect line as yet. I'm just keeping my lines very light and keeping it sketchy. Now, I am at the bottom of the cylinder. Now, you don't want to have the bottom of your cylinder horizontal. A lot of students make that mistake as well. Now remember that the bottom of your container must follow the same line as the top of your container. So this is wrong. So you can go ahead, and if you're good enough, you can just make a contour line like that to match with the top of your cylinder there. Or if you're not that perfect in making your contour line, you can go ahead and you can make another ellipse down there at the bottom. Now remember that it's not a glass container, so you won't be seeing this line in the background. So that line will be removed if you make another ellipse. All right, so you just have this curve coming around there at the bottom of your container. Okay, so now that we have our container, our cup, we're going to move on to the next part of the composition, which is your flowers. So we could approach this by starting to locate or identify where the shapes are and just try and put in your flowers here. All right, but we want to simplify it as much as possible, just as how we simplify the container. So one way of doing this is to try and get the general shape again of what you're looking. All right, so one of the rows appears to be in front, which is about here. So I'm just going to put a circular form shape there, and then I'm going to put another circular shape right about there. All right, now please note that these can be adjusted as you go along. So now that you have those two basic shapes, we're going to start to add some details to your drawing now. I keep my drawing very sketchy. At this stage, the form and shapes are not so clear, but as time goes by, I'm going to put in more details and get those lines, shape, contours more defined. Now you want to remove your ellipse now. Remember that the rose or the plant is not transparent, so you will not be seeing your ellipse anymore through it. The ellipse there drawn before was just a guide for you to get the correct form slash shape of your container. All right. All right, so we now have our basic contour of our subject matter. So we're moving on to the next stage. Now, the next stage is to start to put in your tonal values, your shading. So you want to determine at this stage where the light source is coming from. So based on the image that we are drawing from, we can see cast shadows on this side of the image. So the light source will be coming from this direction. With your light source coming from the right hand side, you will have your middle values or middle tones here in the center of the container. You're going to have highlights on the right hand side. You will have reflective light somewhere about here, and you will have another cast shadow somewhere about here. Now bear in mind that how deep of a value you tone your container will depend on the brightness or lightness of the container. All right, so you don't want to make your tones too strong on this container. All right, now another thing that you want to do is to shade in the direction that your container is formed. So notice I am going back and forth, swaying my pencil back and forth, just to create that direction Now look to the container to give it that round look. All right, now you can also cross hatch this shading. I've done a little bit of it already. You can cross hatch this shading to emphasize on your tones, but you don't want to use too much vertical shading to overpower your curve toning that you just put in a while ago. All right, because you want to keep that form of the container.
Ready to take your calls on 922-4112-5. You can also, excuse me, send us a WhatsApp message 279-8598. All right, we go back to the lines. Mark, good afternoon.
Hi, man, how are you doing?
I'm good, man. Welcome.
What's going on in Jamaica?
Just about everything. Everything you can imagine. We are not separate from the world. We're very much a part of it, and what's going on in the world, we have a microcosm of that right here.
Boy, I want to pray for those missionaries in Haiti. You know?
Well, I figure they're missionaries. Shouldn't they be under the protection of the mark of the beast? Or I'm going to turn it or something. I'm a little dismissive about that. But if you have doubts about it, you have real doubts, you thought about it, you question the science, you want to know how come it happens so quickly, etc., etc. Those are valid questions to my mind.
About some people to the might have had COVID before.
Yes.
And therefore antibodies would have been developed on their face, and they don't want to expose themselves to another wave and the virus to come back.
Right, but you don't, the vaccine doesn't expose you to the virus, you know, because there's no virus in the vaccine, unlike other vaccines. But having caught COVID and recovered does not protect you from an even stronger occurrence. The vaccine does that. The argument is that if you had COVID and you even get one dose of the vaccine, then you have a greater level of protection.
But I heard from the Israel study.
Yes. Hello? Uh-oh. Because the Israel study, and they use Israel a lot because Israel has a high rate of vaccination. Is he back? All right, yes, wait. So those funds are freed up, and they are now naturally when people there's a term for it, but when people have more money the more money people have, especially middle class, lower class, it doesn't necessarily work for those who are rich, or otherwise wealthy. But there's the others who are not they're likely to spend once they have the money. Once they have that money, they're going to spend, and if they spend more, it means it has implications for the economy in more ways than one. It means that the manufacturers will have to put out more goods because chances are people have more money to spend. Instead of buying just one item, I'm going to end up buying three because I can now afford to buy three, or 6 or 12, etc.
So I'm big on benefits, very big on benefits, as opposed to just the cash, because the cash in and of itself is.
I can't use that word. In law or in the ministry, book up that governs education. It's just a slogan, is it?
I don't know about it being just a slogan. It is more than a slogan. It is an expression of empowerment. It's an expression of empowerment. In other words, we don't ever want to start talking about our children, and the first thing we can say is that, him not really have the head feet, and him not really. No, every child can learn. Every child must. The onus is on those of us vested with the authority, vested with the responsibility.